Hi, I'm Roger, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the lesson that you're going to observe. I'm a huge proponent of the use of learning cycles in the science classroom, and I've been using them since I graduated from college. Today is Monday, and I began the unit on Friday with a simple question during my Engage lesson. So students were shown pictures of a seed and a beautiful redwood tree and simply asked to explain where all the stuff in that tree came from. And so I gave them time by table to talk and share out their ideas, and I didn't offer any judgment at this point in time. Next, I asked them to develop experiments that could test their ideas. And again, they shared their ideas. And then finally, I showed them the Van Helmont experiment from the 1700s. And the whole entire point of the lesson was to shine a spotlight on the fact that most students have misconceptions. Almost all of them say that the tree's mass comes from stuff that's pulled up from the ground. To make them feel better, I actually show a clip of the Annenberg Lessons in Thin Air series. It's kind of old now, but they show up on Harvard and MIT's graduation day in this series, and they interview those kids. And they ask them the same question. And for all the money they spend on their education, they have basically the same misconceptions. Today, the point is to start digging in, right, and to learning about what photosynthesis really is. So in my exploration phase, kids do what I call a snap lab. At the very beginning of the lesson today, I try to show them that gas does have weight. I produced some carbon dioxide gas, and it didn't go as well as planned. Every other lesson that I didn't record today, it worked perfectly, but in the one I recorded, I think I was a little nervous. So I'll do that again tomorrow, and I attempt to show them that gases do have mass, but you can see it nonetheless. But in the lesson today, they're going to go through, today and tomorrow, through some stations. It's called a snap lab. There's a science skills station, a narrative station, an assessment station, and a problem-solving station, which really encourages kids to access information about photosynthesis from a lot of different learning styles. And then for my explain stage, I love to do Pogles during learning cycles because it encourages the kids to do the explaining, right? They talk to each other. And then I walk around and I ask probing questions, or I direct their thinking. And then later on during the elaboration stage of the learning cycle, that's when we dig in and I teach more depth about the light-dependent and light-independent steps of photosynthesis. So I hope you enjoy the lesson, and I really appreciate the opportunity to submit an application to the committee. Thanks. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
How was your weekend? Good. Well, I wanted to remind you that Officer Labs is recording today. Just so you know, it's about me and my lesson. You guys just be yourselves and you don't get a deer in headlights. So, how was your weekend? We'll start with that. Good weekend? Let's start with something positive since it's Monday. I want you to turn to a neighbor, and I want everybody to share either one thing that you're grateful about or any good news in your life. Do that now, please, while I grab attendance.
I guess I'm just grateful to be alive. Grateful for my dog. Yeah. I have two dogs and they're both dogs.
All right. How about this? Would anybody be willing to share good news in their life? Everybody smiles. How about something they're grateful for? Ben?
Past weekend I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
All right. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. Anybody else? How about something they're grateful for? I think it's important as we go through our lives to be intentional about thinking about the positive things in our lives, the good things, because we know there's a lot of things that happen all the time that we can't control that aren't so positive. I'll share from my life this weekend on Friday. Mrs. Ritzler, you guys might have had her in 4th grade. We're good friends with her. My wife and I went to a Bon Jovi tribute concert, which was a blast because it's a trip down memory lane for us. On Saturday, I visited with a friend from high school who flew in from Tampa. On Sunday, my son made it home from college spring break, which is always a positive thing when you have a bunch of boys going to, off to Florida. And then finally, my daughter, who's in the Army, checked in with us, and I think I've shared with you that she's a combat medic. She is probably going to make this a career. She really likes it. Although right now she's not very happy. She's in the field and it's very cold in Colorado. But she's thinking about reclassifying from a combat medic to a respiratory therapist, which as a parent, right, being away from high velocity projectiles and being in a hospital would be a much better, safer situation. So those are things I'm grateful about. Let's talk about our lesson, okay? On Friday I mentioned to you that we would be doing an exploration of photosynthesis, and that we'd be using the SNAPS lab format that we've used throughout the year where we have stations, okay? So let's take a look at the objectives to begin with. And because there are 5 of them, I'm not going to ask you to write them down right now. I'll project them a little longer later on when you're doing some station work. And if you get done early, you can write them down like you normally do. So number 1 is I can identify the reactants and products of photosynthesis. Number 2, I can explain the importance of sunlight in photosynthesis. Number 3, I can describe how photosynthesis plays a role in the flow of matter and energy between living things on Earth. Number 4, and there are a lot of these because this is a 2 to 3 day lesson. I can model the process of photosynthesis. And then finally, I can predict how life on Earth would change without plants, algae, and other photosynthetic organisms. All right, so the SNAPS lab is an exploration, just kind of getting into things. We'll do a POGL later, which will give you an opportunity to learn more deeply, and you'll be explaining concepts a lot in that POGL. And then during the evaluate or the elaborate stage, I'll come back and teach in more depth about like the light-dependent reactions and then light-independent reactions. So that's kind of how this process will unfold. At each station, there are unique objectives, but throughout the entire process, there are basically some science and engineering practices where you'll be asked to basically do some of the things that I've got on the board here: graphing, analyzing, interpreting, and so forth. So we got the science skills, the narrative station, the assessment station, and the problem-solving station. Okay? Now, I want to start by going back to Friday. What was the guiding question that kind of was the focus of the lesson on Friday? What one question did I have us spend a lot of time exploring? Grant.
Where did the tree mass come from?
Right. I asked you to consider like a little seed and then a huge redwood tree. And where did the mass of that tree come from? Right? And we went around and we got our ideas. And the point that I was trying to do is really shine a spotlight on the fact that a lot of people, including us, right, in this classroom, have misconceptions about that. And then I showed you a clip from the Annenberg study called The Lessons in Thin Air. And I was trying to make you feel better. That even our graduates at Harvard University and MIT, when they were asked that same question, they struggled. Most of them had some misconceptions about where the mass of a tree came from. So as that day went along, I wrote down 3 statements that I felt captured the misconceptions that people hold. And I wanted to start by reading those statements to you. All right, quote. Again, this is when somebody was presented with the notion that the mass of trees actually comes from where? Where did we learn that it actually came from? Yeah?
CO2.
From carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So when presented with this idea, this was a couple of the quotes that I wrote down. I would disagree, because that same volume of air wouldn't weigh this much unless it was highly compressed. As that girl was holding a log, which I would consider pretty compressed matter compared to gases. A second quote. I would say that's very disturbing and wonder how that could happen. And perhaps my favorite quote. That's hard to believe because CO2 is a gas. It doesn't seem intuitive that you can add mass by taking in a gas. So let me produce a gas and see if we can find a way to observe its weight. I have a little demo that I want to do if you're looking at the assignment board. Let's see if we can show visually that gases have weight. So bear with me as I set this up. I've got a meter stick. And I have 2 brown paper bags with strings tied to them. And I need to balance this, so I'll get to that here in a moment. Takes me a few seconds to get this set up. Usually it'll make adjustments. Pretty close. All right, I'm going to put on some goggles since I'm carrying out a chemical reaction. And this is like a pretty elementary chemical reaction, right? I've got a little baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, which you guys have all seen this done at home or maybe in your science class before. So just a little bit. And I've got some vinegar, which is acetic acid. Anybody happen to know what gas is going to be produced from this chemical reaction? Any ideas? We'll get to that in a second, right? Oops, I didn't mean to add the liquid, but I don't know if you noticed it started to come down before I spilled any of the liquid in there, right? So we can do maybe a little more. And see if I can balance it back out again. Right? So you can see that right now I've got more over here than over here, right? What gas was produced, by the way? Say it louder, I heard it. It's the same stuff our trees want.
Carbon dioxide.
It's carbon dioxide, right? There's a salt produced and some water produced. But essentially, you can see visually the CO2 is a little more dense than the surrounding mixture of air. And it does have weight, right? And so trees, they spend their whole lives pulling in CO2 and building glucose and other biological molecules. And we call that carbon fixation. And I just think it's helpful to try to dispel the myth, right, that the atmosphere isn't really made of matter, and it is. There's a lot of space between the molecules there. So in our SNAPS lab today, we're going to do some things to get prepared like we normally do. Your personal belongings are going to have to be stored. You can do the counter back there. Up here is fine. Up here is fine. I'll get rid of the leftovers here. Even over there on the right side of the sink is fine. But then I want you to bring your notebook with you, your science notebook. If you finish early at a station, in your science notebook, please record the take-home message from that lab station. Maybe take that time to actually write down the objectives. And at the end of station 1, we'll come back together as a class and discuss some of the things that you learned. Everybody good? Anybody have any questions? A lot of you are kind of getting close to wrapping things up, which is great. I do have a couple of questions for you. One thing I'd like to do is just kind of like, what have you learned today from your station? Kind of a debriefing. I also have a couple of questions, just general things, big picture things. So I have a kind of a true-false question first. I want you to think about this. True or false? Oxygen is useless to plants. Oxygen is useless to plants. What do you think? Raise your hand if you think you have an idea about that. What do you think?
True.
True? Why?
Because they only need sunlight. And,
They only need sunlight and what else?
water.
And water? Just sunlight and water? Is there a third thing they need?
And carbon.
And carbon dioxide?
They do need oxygen.
What's that?
They do need oxygen.
They do need oxygen. Why?
Because.
Because I don't know. It's all right. Anybody have an idea of why plants might need oxygen? Right, you just spent some time looking at photosynthesis, and we see it as a waste product. But why would plants still need oxygen, even if it's a waste product? Ben?
They need oxygen because the oxygen gives life to the animals, and the animals give them carbon dioxide.
So part of a cycle? All right, so we can definitely link it back to nutrient cycles. If you didn't hear Ben, he said the animals need oxygen, and then they produce CO2 part of the carbon cycle. What about plants, though? Do they directly need oxygen? I'm not leaving that very easily, so there must be something else going on here that I'm trying to get you to think about. Where, let me ask you this. I'll come at this a different way. Where in our cells do we eventually need the oxygen to get? So what organelle in our cells is going to use oxygen in the long run? Grant?
Our brain.
Our brain, that's an organ. I said what organelle. So think about the organelles of our cells. What organelle needs oxygen? Ben, did you just mouth the word?
Mitochondria.
It's the mitochondria. And so effectively what I'm asking you is, do plants have mitochondria? Pretty early in all this stuff with plants. So it's a great example of what I said on Friday. We study photosynthesis in 4th grade and junior high. Here we are in high school, and we really still aren't really comfortable with what plants are and what they're doing. And plants are amazing creatures. Plants are amazing organisms. I have a book on my shelf called Lab Girl. It's about this girl who grew up in her dad's lab, and she's an expert on plants today. And it's a really awesome book. Plants can do a lot of things. They're very diverse, and they absolutely do need oxygen to extract the energy from the food that they make, right? So we have to eat food, right? What do we call organisms that can't make their own food? They have to go out and consume it. What's that term? Not an autotroph, a heterotroph, right? As heterotrophs, we have to go out and find nutrients for energy. Plants can make their own food, so they're autotrophs, but they also have to extract the energy from that food, and they need oxygen to do that. And so that's something I want to point out, like big picture kind of thing, is they do have mitochondria, and they are carrying out respiration. So absolutely, they need oxygen. So something to keep in mind. What do you think's happening in the fall when plants' leaves change colors? What's going on there? What is breaking down? I'll start with that. So think this through. Yes?
Chlorophyll.
Chlorophyll is starting to break down, right? Because they're starting to get ready for a different time of the year. And what you're seeing is other pigments that capture different wavelengths of light, so that a plant can extract energy from more than one narrow wavelength band. And so we see different pigments. Something worth keeping in mind too. The people that built a model, I visited your tables a little bit ago, and I asked you what the value of models are in science. And this could be anybody. What would be a good reason for building models, both physical models or more models in our minds? Like, what's the value of a model in a science, the field of science? Like, what do models do for us? Yes?
They help you to visualize what's going on.
Right, so they offer us a visual representation of processes that can be complex. So scientists are always building models to help even communicate their ideas to others who might not be scientists. So your model is pretty simplistic, but it's just to get you thinking about the process of photosynthesis early on in our unit. And then, like I said before, when we do there's an explain stage of the learning cycle where you'll do some talking about photosynthesis. That'll be via a POGL. And then I'll circle back later on and really dig in more deeply with some of the chemistry of photosynthesis. We'll look at what's called the light-dependent reactions. They have to happen in the presence of light. And then the light-independent steps. When I was a kid, they called these the dark reactions, and it fed a misconception in my brain. In high school, I thought that the dark reactions happened at night. And the reality is what that means is that they don't require sunlight. And so a better term is light-independent part of photosynthesis. It's just not necessary to have light. So that's kind of what we'll do eventually on the last part of our unit. Okay? So at this point, wrap up anything that you need to, finish up those questions if you have them. Make some notes in your notebook of key ideas. Tomorrow we're going to do 2 stations, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. We'll wrap everything up on Wednesday and then move into the next step of our learning cycle.